Greetings. It is Sunday, June 7th, 2020. 2 days ago, it would have been Breonna Taylor's 27th birthday. I'm Mahan Mirza, Executive Director of the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion at the University of Notre Dame. Welcome to our online conversation series, Engaged, Religion and the Common Good. As we get started, we invite you to join the conversation by visiting our website or following us on Twitter at Ansari UND. We're engaged today with Imam Zaid Shakir. Imam Zaid is a veteran of the United States Air Force. He studied traditional Islam for nearly a decade in Syria, and he is a co-founder of Zaytuna College, America's first accredited Muslim liberal arts college in Berkeley, California. Imam Zaid is often called the Imam of America. You can learn more about him at his website, newislamicdirections.com, where you will find his writings and lectures in video and audio, including his book, Scattered Pictures, Reflections of an American Muslim. Imam Zaid, welcome. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Alaikum
barakatuh.
salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you, Dr. Mahan, for inviting me to engaging me.
Thank you. It's great to see you. I remember when you came back from Syria to New Haven, Connecticut, I was just starting my PhD. We had you over for lunch and you said, I'm bringing a friend with me. And you remember who that was? It turned out to be Dawood Yassin.
Oh, yeah. Mashallah, mashallah.
But yeah, that was almost 20 years ago. It feels like it's yesterday. And I mentioned Breonna Taylor. She was killed on March 13th in Louisville, Kentucky, home and resting place of the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali. You presided over his funeral ceremony, and Breonna Taylor is one of many names, most unknown. Most names are unknown that have come to symbolize racism in America. The latest, of course, is George Floyd. In a couple of weeks, we'll have the one-year anniversary of the death of Eric Logan. He was an unarmed black man killed by police on June 16th, 2019, a couple of blocks from my home in South Bend, Indiana. I remember your having cut your studies short in Syria right after 9/11, returning to guide the community of Masjid al-Islam in New Haven, Connecticut. And those were very challenging days for Muslims. Tell us the difference between then and now. What has changed? Are you more or less hopeful?
I think a lot has changed and a lot has remained the same. So I think these sort of questions defy sort of a one catch-all answer. The thing that has changed, I think you see a lot more young people, these demonstrations and protests that have sprouted up around the country, the overwhelming number of which have been non-violent. In many instances, as we saw in Lafayette Park, it was actually the police, and in that case, including the military service that initiated violence against peaceful protesters. In other instances, you have provocateurs from both the right and the left. And unfortunately, depending on who you talk to, it's one side. If you're a government official in the Trump administration, is the left, it's Antifa. It's not even the black bloc, the anarchists who really enjoy smashing things up. It's this kind of amorphous, define it as you wish organization, the anti-fascist. It is ironic that we're talking about placing anti-fascist organization on the list of terrorist organizations, while on the other side you have White Lives Matter, a neo-Nazi group. You have the Klan, the skinhead and assorted array, the Boogaloo Boys and others capitalizing on the opportunity to shoot protesters or loot and pillage and burn and bomb and blame it on the protesters. And so despite all of that and the way that situation is exploited, the overwhelming majority have been nonviolent, and they've been overwhelmingly multiracial. So you see all people out there in the streets, and that's a change. I think back in those days, any protest over police killings as they affect African Americans, and other communities are affected, but not to the extent of the African American community. Also, the impact on other communities. So some people will point out that white Americans are twice as many white Americans are killed by police every year than African Americans. That's true statistically, but if you're African American, you're twice as likely to be killed. And if you're unarmed, 4 times, and some studies 5 times more likely to be killed at the hand of police. But be that as it is, only the violence that occurs against African Americans can be situated into a long history of institutional and structural violence perpetrated against a specific community. And so there's a long historical context that gives extra urgency to the issue in the case of the African American communities, I would argue. And so the change, I think, in anti-violence in the context of the African American community in 2002, late 2001, 2002, those marches, demonstrations would have been overwhelmingly African American. Today, they're multiracial. In many instances, they're majority white American or European American. I don't like the term white and black American. Anyway, so I think that's a change. What stayed the same is the general apathy of the overwhelming majority of people who watch it on the news, get upset, disgusted, or just don't want to deal with it. So you see the knee on George Floyd's neck. After 1 or 2 minutes, I turn the channel. I don't want to deal with this. And I think that apathy is one of the reasons there's been so little change at the level of policy, because there has not been a critical mass of Americans across various demographic lines, across age lines, across racial lines, across gender lines, who have come together to address this problem collectively as a problem that is worthy of being solved. Because if we don't solve it, you always have activists. And unfortunately, some activists, be they governmental agents, be they street level activists, have a lot of money and a lot of media power, and they will exploit this situation. I think we've seen the president exploit it already. He can't run on the economy after one of the greatest record economic meltdowns in human history. So in 3 months, less than 3 months, we go from this greatest economy in human history, as some were bragging, to 45 million people unemployed, and an implosion of whole sectors of the economy, the collapse of the fossil fuel industry, were it not for government subsidies and bailouts. And so he can't run on the economy. He can't run on exemplary stewardship during the course of the coronavirus pandemic, with just the late response and the mixed messages and everything from injecting Clorox or Lysol to sniffing glue, not sniffing glue, I'm sorry. He didn't say that. But just a wide array of radiating yourself. And so he can't run on stewardship during the coronavirus, as would be the case of someone like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, were she to exploit her stewardship that has resulted in virtually eliminating the virus from New Zealand. And so the Floyd killing comes up, so he's running as the law and order president. And if you can't hear that dog whistle, then you don't have ears. But in any case, and so that being the situation being exploited, and immediately after making that announcement, a day or two later, you have the flexing of the muscles in Lafayette Park, where even the military is called in, buzzing protesters with military helicopters, 20 feet above their heads, the tear gas, the batons, the beatings. And so he's exploiting the situation. Others are exploiting the situation in very negative ways. And you're going to have demagogues who are going to rise up and exploit the situation. So nature abhors a vacuum, as does politics. And in that political void, if the people don't unite and step up in a very strong way and move beyond the apathy to address the issue, others are going to fill that void. And unfortunately, in most instances, it won't be filled with something pleasant or something unifying or something compassionate or something that shows a deep love for one's brother and sister in humanity. It's going to be filled by something else.
So it looks, what I hear from you, one of the things that's changed from before is the coalition has grown bigger, which is really important for social movements, to have broad-based coalitions. But on
I
the
think it's grown movement primarily. Most of that growth is amongst young people, younger people of various races.
So that does give us hope. On the other hand, there's that silent majority that's still silent and somewhat apathetic. We'll see, which way they go. But there's clearly seems to be a tussle, and nobody can tell where this will end up. So like, they crushed those protesters in Lafayette Park. Now it's called Black Lives Matter Plaza, and you can see the from space it written on the street. So in big yellow paint. And so there's an interesting, a fascinating conflict between the movement and those who are in power. And is it going to be chaos or community? Which reminds me of Martin Luther King Jr., his book, his last book that he wrote, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or community? And he wrote that in 1967. And with his unique eloquence he expressed, I'm going to read this passage and ask your response. He begins his last chapter on that, the World House. And he says, some years ago, a famous novelist died. Among his peers was found a list of suggested plots for future stories, the most prominently underscored being this one. A widely separated family inherits a house in which they have to live together. This is the great new problem of mankind, says King. We have inherited a large house, a great world house, in which we have to live together. Black and white, Easterner and Westerner, Gentile and Jew, Catholic and Protestant, Muslim and Hindu. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interest, who, because we can never again live apart, must learn somehow to live with each other in peace. However deeply American Negroes are caught in the struggle to be at last at home in our homeland of the United States, we cannot ignore the larger world house in which we are also dwellers. Equality with whites will not solve the problem of either whites or Negroes if it means equality in a world society stricken by poverty and in a universe doomed to extinction by war. All inhabitants of the globe are now neighbors. So that's his opening from that chapter. And so my question to you is, it looks like he asked chaos or community, and 50 years later, it looks like it's total chaos in America and in the world. Some might say that chaos, the chaos America has produced in the world is now coming home to us. And so if we zoom out a little, help us understand what is happening from a global perspective.
Well, I think that Dr. King was a very astute observer of human society, both domestically and internationally. And he understood that the foundations of American power, as currently constructed, both then and now, were intricately connected to the suppression of the struggles and aspiration of poor people, of minorities, not just in this country, but throughout the world. And I think that's a very apt linkage. Our militarism, we have upwards to 800 military bases of various sorts scattered around the world. They're out there for a purpose. When we have our economic relations structurally render many countries then and now into banana republics or manufacturers of goods for our consumption, and not necessarily sharing that with the people and the lands they find themselves in, then it becomes very difficult for us to separate those two, especially with the international supply chains, something we've seen broken down in the context of this virus, leading to domestic shortages. And so we never think about the banana republics where they're growing the bananas we can eat year round, but the people growing the bananas are suffering from potassium deficiency. And so our president is in India, hugging and kissing Modi, while he's engaged in what can only be described as a genocidal campaign against the people of Kashmir, and then extending that campaign to all of India in terms of questioning the citizenship of Muslims, blaming the coronavirus on Muslims with deadly consequences. And you could go to Palestine, you could go here, there, and elsewhere. And so I think it's critically important that we begin to connect these dots and to see that we stand at a pivotal moment in human history. Right now, even in this country, it is community, by and large. Most people and most communities, including African-American communities, are not directly affected by the violence. The police killings, they occur far too often, far more than they should. But everyone's not affected by that. Everyone is affected indirectly by the institutional structures that leads that violence to unfold disproportionately in the lives of African-American communities and of African-Americans, but everyone in the community is not directly affected. Most people in the context of the virus now are going about their normal lives. But we're at a critical moment where things can happen really fast, where we have martial law, where we have people being shot in the street hourly, and not every 2.5 days, as Malcolm X grassroots report indicated. Every 2.5 days, there's an African-American shot by law enforcement. And so it could be hourly. We're at a point where unless we come together and unless we begin to connect the dots and unless we begin to rein in the military, unless we look at the relationship between disproportionate spending on the military to police the world and disproportionate spending on police departments to police our cities. Los Angeles, the police budget was expanded. What are they calling for? Spend some of that money on education as opposed to policing. Spend some of that money on healthcare as opposed to policing. Spend some of that money on various social services, because a healthy, educated community is a community less likely to engage in criminal activity. Mm. And so the disproportionate spending on our police forces, the disproportionate, the militarizing of our police forces, which goes hand in hand with the spending, because you're paying for that excess military equipment. It goes hand in hand with the policies, because the quotas that you're meeting in terms of arrests are rewarded with free military hardware. This is the nature of the game. And so unless we begin to undo the militarism domestically and understand the role that it plays in both the impoverishment and the oppression of our poor communities, then understanding how those things play out globally in exactly the same ways. We're just a microcosm of the world.
Yeah, this reminds me of in what you're saying, Rabbi Michael Lerner, his Tikkun Olam, like the repair of the world, he has this global Marshall Plan. And I looked at it once. A number of lawmakers signed on to this. On the top of them was Keith Ellison, but back when he was in Congress. And his argument is, Rabbi Lerner's, that if you spend a fraction, I think it was like something like 3% of the United States military budget on humanitarianism, we'd be able to solve all the major sort of poverty issues of
Hunger, disease, shelter.
of the planet.
Yeah.
And so you need to shift from militarism to humanitarianism, and that's a shift that all kinds of structural, I think, structures in society prevent us from taking.
And to go back to your first question, why has the military budget grown steadily over the years, despite the various Republican, Democratic administrations? It doesn't matter.
I saw your blog on this. I saw your blog, Trump, Hawk, or Dove.
Oh, yeah. But, you know, the apathy, because we haven't bothered as a society, collectively. Some of us, may Allah, may Almighty God bless us to be in that number, do care and have written and taken measures and joined organizations working to demilitarize our country. But not enough of us have cared to even raise basic questions. In COVID, this virus, why are some communities so disproportionately affected? Because of poor health care, because of living in food deserts. And it's not just African-American communities. The Navajo Nation is the community with the highest rates of infection right now. And so if you look at these communities, you see the common denominators: poor health care. There are only a handful of ICU beds in the entire Navajo Nation. We could count them on our two hands, I believe. And you look at our inner city communities: poor hospitals, underfunded hospitals, being closed or just barely being sustained on shoestring budgets, inadequate service. You go to Harlem Hospital, they're making oxygen tents with plastic and duct tape. Literally, you could Google it. If it's on Google, it must be true. So, you know, why do we have these disparities? Why is all of this money going to the military? And a lot of this totally waste. Why are we modernizing our nuclear forces as we disengage from nuclear disarmament treaties and nuclear weapons control treaties? You know, why are we engaging in these insane policies while people are underfed, people are ill-educated, people are basic needs in many instances just aren't being met? Capitalism is calling the shots and not compassion. And so why aren't there enough ventilators, which in reality proved to be not so effective in treating the effects of corona? But why were there so few ventilators? Why was there so little protective equipment? Why are we importing masks from China and other places when we're the wealthiest nation on earth? Because maximum profit discourages stockpiling even essential gear to deal with national emergencies, which experts have told us are coming. We've been warned about a pandemic such as the nature we find ourselves in now for the last couple of decades.
So, okay, so this is very eloquently put. This is the criticism. And King, you know, connects racism to militarism and capitalism. Another person I was just looking at is Chris Hedges, the journalist and critic, who also points out these exact same vices in his latest book, America: A Farewell Tour, which came out before the pandemic and before George Floyd. He says this, and I want to ask you about what's next. So Hedges says, socialism would not be possible until capitalism had exhausted its ability to expand and increase profits. That the end is coming is hard now to dispute. He says this before. although one would be foolish to predict when. Global capitalism, in its final iteration, may replicate China's totalitarian capitalism, a brutal system sustained by severe repression. So that's what Hedges says, and I hear echoes of this when you spoke about the military response to the protests happening here and what you just said. So we critique capitalism and militarism, but the question is, what comes next? Would you say that a new order is upon us? And what is it? Is it kind of socialism or something else?
Some people talk about compassionate capitalism. People like Robert Wright, Clinton's, I think was secretary of something or another, teaches at UC Berkeley now. And there are others, many others talk about compassionate capitalism. Maybe it will be compassionate capitalism, I think, but the current system has failed in 4 basic areas. Number one, and the virus has exposed it, it can't provide us all with adequate health care. Just, it would be too costly to the system and therefore would erode profits. It can't effectively feed us all going into the future because the supply chains, which are predicated on maximizing profit, are too dispersed, too distant. And so we have to get to localism, but localism isn't profitable, and localism also doesn't require a lot of fossil fuels, which leads to the third inability of our current system. It can't wean us off of fossil fuels and enter us into an age of clean alternatives, because so much money is tied up with the fossil fuel industry, is subsidized by governments, subsidized by taxpayers. Gas guzzling SUVs, you're eligible for several $1,000s in rebates to buy these gas guzzling vehicles. And then it can't eliminate the scourge, the threat of nuclear conflict. It's only exacerbating it. And not only because of the profits that are involved in high-tech weaponry. And so any high-tech gadget that's going to make some General Dynamics or General Electric or Grumman Corporation, Northrop Grumman, or any of these corporations wealthy, that's money that's taken away from benefiting our citizenry. And it's also money taken away from the essential non-glamorous aspects of the military infrastructure, like Sikorsky helicopters that crash on a regular basis because they're not maintained, because the budget for maintenance isn't going to enrich a corporation. Buying a new multi-billion-dollar weapon system is. And so just basic maintenance isn't happening, and soldiers are dying as a result. And then finally, it can't move us beyond the scourge of racism, domestically or globally. And so whatever system it's going to be that compassionate capitalism, be that democratic socialism, be that some Muslims say Islam. Islam balances in all of these areas. And just Muslims haven't made the case. Whatever that system is going to be, it's going to have to address those 4 issues to be effective in fostering life on this planet and fostering sustainability, which is going to be key to life on this planet. Greenland, the ice caps are melting and is exposing dark rock as opposed to white ice that's reflecting all of this energy back into space. We have dark rock that's absorbing this heat and just compounding and exacerbating the climate crisis. So we have to change, and we have to change fast and drastically. And a system that is predicated on cannibalizing everything, the environment, the forests, the oceans, in order to perpetuate itself, isn't a system that we can afford in the future.
Mm. Imam Zaid,
Pun intended.
There's so much that you've said here that we could um, dwell on for a long time and unpack, and hopefully we can talk again at the Keough School
Can I
of.
quickly add one thing?
Yes, yes, of course.
To
And I
those,
have one more question after that.
it's also a system that doesn't foster a healthy spiritual relationship between human beings, our creator, even between human beings and ourselves. And a lot of the problems we are talking about, the deeper, what fuels a racist is insecurity. What's the root of that insecurity? The lack of a meaningful relationship with God. Because a person at peace with God and who values himself or herself based on the relationship with God and not their relationship with people is a person that's not insecure. And a person that's not insecure will never fall for the demagogic appeal of racists.
Yeah, so beautiful, and you took the words out of my mouth, because what I was going to say here at the Keough School, the term they use is at Notre Dame, integral human development, the development of the whole person and every person, including the spiritual aspect when we talk about human flourishing. And so certainly what we have in place right now with unbridled capitalism, as opposed to perhaps compassionate capitalism or something else, is not working for furthering human dignity of all. And I want to turn to my last question to you, framing it through Malcolm X. And I know you admire Malcolm X a lot. You have something about him on your website as well, extensive engagement. In answers to his answer to King's question, where do we go from here? He offered his speech, Ballot or the Bullet. And that was in April 1964. He says in that speech, I am a Muslim minister. And he says, I am a Black nationalist freedom fighter. And so those two identities came together in him seamlessly. How do these two identities work in today's world? And for you, what is the relationship between Black Lives Matter, America, capitalism, and Islam?
Yeah, I think I would drop the matters, because Black Lives Matters is a movement, and you can critique or you can praise. There are things the average person would find laudable, and some things the average person might condemn. But certainly one laudable aspect is taking a lead and challenging and calling public attention to a lot of the racial injustices and inequalities. However, Black Lives Matter is not the only organization in the African American community that's speaking up for Black lives. So I would say Black lives, period. And defending, speaking up for, advocating for Black lives is work that's undertaken by Black Lives Matter as an organization. Is work that's taken up by the NAACP. Is work that's taken up by the traditional Black churches. Is work that's taken up by a wide array of actors in the African American community. And so I would say the relationship between that and between one's identity as a Muslim, in my case, a Muslim, is all of us have a people. And most of us have many people. So my heritage is African American. On my father's side, there's Irish, there's Native American, and so, but the most visible identity on my mother's side, I know both paternally and maternally, the slave Rich Eubanks and Will Spence on respective sides, who were sold into slavery and eventually ending up in Harris County, Georgia, where my grandparents, so those are my grandparents' grandparents. And my grandparents, Harris County, Georgia, my mother born there, going to high school in Philadelphia because she had great promise. in that regard. And so we have a people. I have a people, and I have a religion. And those two identities are not incompatible with each other, nor is it un-Islamic to recognize them. You have a people, they're rooted in South Asia, but you're also, as I am, we're American citizens. So our people are the American people. Your people are also the Pakistani and Indian, Bengali people, the people of South Asia. And so there's no incompatibility. Our Prophet mentioned al-adhan Habashi. The adhan is for the Ethiopians, such as Bilal al-Habashi. Al-iman Yamani, wal-hikmatu Yamaniya. Wisdom and faith are best found amongst the people of Yemen. وإن تتولى يستبدل قوما غيركم ثم لا يكون أمثالكم هو وقومه ووضع كفته الشريفة على كتف سلمان الفارسي. If you turn back, Allah will bring another people and they won't be like you. And he placed his blessed palm on the shoulder of Salman al-Farisi, the Persian. And so we all have people, but we're united at a human level. And Allah says, in one of the most eloquent passages in Quran, يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. Oh humanity, not Muslims. Allah doesn't say يا أيها الذين آمنوا, oh you believers. أيها الناس, humanity. We've made you from a single pair, a male and female. And we've created you from a single pair, a male and female, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may recognize in each other the creative power of your Lord. And many translators add the implication of that, not that you may despise and hate one another. And so our various identities, our various peoples and tribes, we recognize the creative power of God, the different types of hair and the different eye colors and the different physical features. They're all a sign of the creative power of God. They're to glorify our creator rather. The best of you, though, isn't the one who has a particular physical feature. Usually our exegetes, they comment on this verse, إن الله لا ينظر إلى صوركم وأموالكم ولكن ينظر إلى قلوبكم وأعمالكم. God doesn't look at your physical forms. God doesn't care who's black, white, short, tall, round face, slim face, dark hair, light hair. None of that concerns our Lord. God doesn't look at your physical form, nor does he look at your wealth. God doesn't care who's rich or poor. Rich people have a test and a trial in their wealth. Poor people have a test and trial in their deprivation. The best of you is the one who is most conscious and aware of their responsibility before their Lord. And that responsibility includes to their fellow human being. And akramakum indallahi atqakum. And so these identities, they overlap. There's the Muslim, there's the African American, there's the South Asian, there's the European American, there's the Christian, and those combinations. There are all these combinations. And so as a Muslim, I have a multiplicity of identities that are mutually strengthening and not mutually conflicting. And so they go to harmony, and then they create a realm and a sphere of responsibilities. I have a responsibility to the African American community. I have a responsibility to the American community. I'm a human being. I have a responsibility to the global community. And that responsibility is to try to be an agent of good. There's a beautiful hadith. I think we're close to wrapping up, but our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings of Almighty God upon him, he said, "Utlubul khayra dahrakum kullah." Seek good all of the time you spend on this earth. Utlubul khayra dahrakum kullah. So every moment that we're on this earth, no matter what situation or context we find ourselves in, we should try to seek good for our souls, ultimately salvation, the ultimate good. Seek good for our peers, seek good for the poor, the downtrodden, the oppressed, seek good for the wealthy. We're not communists. We don't want to take your money. But we warn you, as FDR warned the wealthy. He said, look at these people on the street who we encourage to get out into the street. We tell them, make me do it. Make me push this New Deal through. They're going to take all your wealth. So let's craft some policies where the government can take some of it for their benefit before they organize themselves and take all of it. And that makes a lot of sense. And so we should be a source of good for the wealthy with sincere counsel, sincere encouraging charity, as opposed to greed. I mean, after the first billion, what can you do? What's left to buy? I mean, how many clothes can you wear? How many pairs of shoes can you wear in a lifetime? How many houses can you live in? You have a chateau, a beach house in the Hamptons, you have a condo in London, and you have a house in the Alps. I mean, you spend one day here and 2 days there. You didn't get to the Alps this year. You're just too busy. You didn't go to Davos, so you weren't in the neighborhood for the World Economic Forum, so you weren't in the neighborhood.
That reminds me of the verse وَتَفَاخُرٌ بَيْنَكُمْ وَتَكَاثُرٌ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ. The mutual boasting.
Exactly. Yeah, I have a yacht anchored at my beachfront in the Hamptons. Master, you ever ride in the yacht? I don't know. And you have to have horses. You get into a certain economic strata. You have to have a house in Litchfield County in Connecticut with some horses. You never ride the beast. Then you have to hire someone to take care of them. And that's beautiful. That's the verse you referenced. This was for mutual boasting between, oh, you don't have horses yet? Man, you're supposed to be wealthy, man. Come on, get with the program. And so what do you do after the first billion? What do you do? So we have to be more sharing, more caring, more compassionate. We have to encourage each other. And if those encouragements come through non-violent protests, we raise our voices, or our young people get a sense of their social responsibility, all the better. Power to them. Just non-violent.
And I think this is beautifully expressed. One of the things the Quran has said is that the love of these things, even of these wal-khayl al-musawwama, these horses, has been made beloved to you, but not at the expense of the dignity of so much of humanity that doesn't have the basic goods it needs to survive, let alone flourish.
Clean water, access to clean water. There are countries in Africa without a single ICU bed and a single ventilator, rather, in the entire country. And so we shouldn't feel guilty that we have so much. And we see now, even in some areas, we don't have enough. But it should encourage us to be more responsive to the needs of our brothers and sisters. So, what does, the Quran, وَلَئِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. If you give thanks for the blessing, I will increase. I'll give you more. But we should understand thankfulness for material wealth and bounties is involved in sharing it with others. That's how you express thankfulness. You share it with others. And God said, listen, I'll give you more. I will increase you, but you have to share it. And so may God bless us to be more sharing, more caring, more compassionate, and to translate that into active work to improve the lot of others.
We want to thank you, Imam Zaid, and we're going to share this video. So we're going to thank you. We're going to share this video, and we hope with our thanks we get more of you in the future. As you were speaking, just wrapping up, when you're talking about your family in Georgia, I was reminded of Keith Ellison again, when he was taking his oath of office. as a congressman on the Quran, and some thought that that was a violation of, you know, the sanctity of that chamber. And there was even at that time, I remember people said we need to.
That was Thomas Jefferson's Quran. Come on.
Yeah, it was Jefferson's Quran, and it turned into an immigration debate that these Muslims are coming and they're changing our country. And Ellison said, "What are you talking about? My family's been here since 1742." And so when you were talking and then you were going back and forth with from Arabic, I was just thinking, you know, this is the best of Islam, but also the best of America. And those two can go together and thrive together. I'd love to keep talking.
Yeah.
I know you have to go and lead.
Have to do it again.
You have to go and lead a wedding, which is also so interesting. The juxtaposition of this joy and such sorrow and trial.
No, listen, I think one of the things as Muslims, we're resilient people. I remember in the one of the intifadas, or shortly after, we were visiting Palestine. And we're in Jordan actually, but Palestinian merchants. It was a rainstorm, it's pouring rain, and they're just going through one of these waves of bombardment and boycott curfews, and these guys were selling shoes, and they were just they were dancing a gig. Ahlan wa sahlan ya shabab, khams riyal, like there's 5 riyals, and they're just ahlan wa sahlan ya, doing the dafka. And so listen, you know, we are affected, our hearts grieve, but at the end of the day, we have to share joy with each other. If we're all walking around in this overwhelming funk, who's going to cheer everyone up? There's no one left to cheer the others up. And so we definitely feel the pain. Tears flow from our eyes. Our hearts, you know, you can't, if you can watch, I don't even recommend watching, but what happened to George Floyd and not be affected, you're not human. There's a fundamental quality of what it means to be human has been taken away from you. If you can watch these guys tracking down Ahmaud Arbery as he's just jogging in the streets, short pants and a t-shirt, no backpack, nothing to give you any hint he's planning some burglary or something. He's going to put it in his underwear. And then watch him stalked, filmed, murdered. And now they have the last thing that was said on the cell phone of the son was effing nigger. And that's in the public record now. Or Kenneth Chamberlain, White Plains, New York, ex-Marine, rolls over on his life alert pendant. They send the police to just see if he's all right. They end up kicking down his door and tasing him and shooting him. And again, when they're trying to break through into the house through the window, the cop is on the life alert tape calling the man a nigger. And so if those things cannot lead you to see that there are some terrible realities in this country, not universal. All police aren't like that. All vigilante, well, probably most vigilantes like those McMichaels are, but who knows? But there's some terrible realities that we need to address as a society. These things shouldn't happen, and they shouldn't happen in the context of this kind of hateful, dehumanizing language. Is unacceptable. But while we deal with those realities, we have lives to live, we have children to raise, we have spouses to love, we have communities to uplift. And so we can't allow these things to dehumanize us. We can't allow these things to take the ability to find joy in our relationships and with our friends and our families and our communities. And so we have to be resilient. We have to avoid becoming bitter, consumed by bitterness, revenge, vindictiveness. but we have to work hard. They have to fuel us to work hard as we do in Ramadan. But after Ramadan, there's Eid. And so we break periodically and we laugh and smile and we picnic and then we go back to work, inshallah.
Thank you. Thank you, Memze. What's going to be ringing in my head is do good for wherever you are for your time on earth.
All of your time, just be an ambassador, a messenger, an embodiment of good.
And in the end, all that remains is the face of God.
Yeah, that's it. Allahu Akbar.
Thank you, Memze. Thank you.
I better go to get involved with this wedding.
That was Imam Zaid Shakir. You can see more of him at newislamicdirections.com, and you can check us out at ansari.nd.edu.